This is Leadership in Action, and I'm Casey Cheshire. Join me as we delve deep into the passions, expertise, and experiences of Boston area innovators. Sponsored by the Boston chapter of the Entrepreneurs Organization. This is Leadership in Action. Oh, we are on the roller coaster ride. It is time to get started. I'm excited for this conversation. We are going to cover some new ground, and our guest today is an entrepreneur, a strategist, an executor. And what I love about our conversations already is just the idea of seeing it through from a plan and that planning side all the way through to execution. A masterful merchandiser, an analytics aficionado, and he blends the creative with the analytical and the data side. And we are going to talk more about that today. Managing partner of Tillerman, Chris Borduas. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Casey. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Man, this is exciting. We've got some interesting concepts that kind of battle at each other. So I'm just going to shut up on my side, pass it to you. Can you smash for us some kind of myth or misconception around leadership, being an entrepreneur, running a business?
Yeah. So I thought about this a fair amount. And I think that when I tell people what we do for a living, we manage data, and we manage it specifically for apparel. But when I tell people I'm in data management, everybody assumes that it's really like an IT function, or, that I have some math expertise or some computer science expertise. And the thing about our job is data management is really a creative exercise. We approach it that way. It isn't so much an IT function as it is, understanding a need and figuring out how to serve the need, how to get the information that you need to get. And when you think about data management, so obviously this is almost all I think about. There's really a couple of different components to it. One is, where do you get the data? Then what do you do with the data, and how do you make it into something you can use to help you run your business? And that all requires a huge amount of creativity. And so I just look at my job much more as a creative function than it is an IT function. We use IT obviously as a mechanism to deliver, but really it's creative. And it's exciting. I love what I do. So it sounds like a boring job, but I don't find it boring at all.
No, the way you describe it though, I've always thought that too. And why do we think of the numbers, the data analytics, the data analysis here why do we see it as like a black and white, cut and dry math, IT, non-creative type? And why do we see that? Why do we end up thinking about it that way?
I think it's because numbers can be boring. You look at a spreadsheet and that can be a very sort of boring thing to look at. But the way we look at it is you have people in your organization that need to make decisions, right? So you have all different levels, whether you're the CEO or a line person or whatever it is. And in our industry, it's really a marriage of science and art, because most of our clients are apparel makers. So that part of it's the art, right? The design and all that stuff. But so the data part of it is boring, right? I mean, it's boring to look at sheets of numbers, but the how you get it done part, and then what do you do with it? So we're taking data and we're trying to get the right people, the right information they need to make the best decisions they can. And it's that part of it, I think is exciting. And I think, that for us is where it isn't, just a boring math exercise. I'm not a math guy. I never was. So for me, it was really more process and puzzle solving than it is science and math.
I totally get that, right? The way you've described it has sort of changed my mindset, because now I see, well, maybe the people that deal with hanging on to the data or storing it or capturing it maybe is the more of the IT function, or
Right.
or manipulating it to be in the correct column with the right percent decimal, great math. But then to your point, that I don't say that's the easy part, but the hard part then, or the creative part, is what are these numbers saying? What's the story? And then what kind of actions do we take from that? I mean, I think that's where we all get hung up. Everyone says, oh, go capture the data. But then once you get it, you just stare at this table of numbers, and then it's that next step though. So how do we approach that? How do you turn the boring sheet of numbers into a story and actionable takeaways?
Yeah. So we look at it. So our mission statement is we always talk about simplifying the process for people. if you think about, I want to get a glass of water, you can't drink a glass of water if it's coming out of a fire hose. So it's how do you take a massive amount of information that's out there and turn it into something that's usable? So step one in that process is what's out there and what do you need, right? So a huge part of our job is the data capture. That's where a lot of the creativity comes in because
Oh, really?
yeah, because if you look at our industry, I'm sure it's true of every industry. I only know ours. So we're capturing data for retailers from retailers across the country. So they all communicate information differently. They have different measures, different metrics, different time periods, different formats to give it to us. So our first job is how do we get it? And it's not, it's easy if you're one person grabbing one piece of data, you go out and get it. But if you're trying to normalize this, scale it up, do all that stuff, that's where a huge amount of the creativity comes in. So step one is how do we go out and get it? Step two is now we've got all this information. How do we consolidate it into something that you can use? And, again, that where I get excited is it's not so much just being able to do that once. It's how do you make it where it's scalable? How do you make it where it's repeatable, it's accurate, it's auditable, all of the stuff that, if you're a consumer of data, you want to make sure you're looking at information that's correct, right? So that's step two. And then step three is understanding what's the end use of this thing. How's someone going to take, I'm going to give you a performance report that tells you how many, 3/4 zip sweaters you sold. What are you doing with that? Are you making a new product? Are you selling reorders? What are you doing with it? How do I get it to you in a way where things are apparent, you can understand what's happening? And what we always talk about is one question isn't really what we're trying to get to. We're trying to get you to, you've asked a question, now you got an answer. Well, that leads to 4 more questions. So how do we give you the ability to easily get to that information? And that's the exciting part of our job, I think, is really trying to create the accuracy, the flexibility, the scalability so that you can do kind of whatever you want with it. It's funny, you said at the beginning that I'm a good merchandiser. The reason I do this for a living is because I'm actually a terrible merchant. I was never able.
Really?
I started my career as a buyer, not as a buyer, as an assistant buyer. And I was a buyer at Lord & Taylor. And I just never understood why anyone would want to spend. I remember being on a Super Bowl Sunday at 11 o'clock at night, still at Nautica buying the line. You had to do it all there. And the next day I'm sitting there with my boss going through trying to figure out which brown plaid the guy would be more likely to buy. And I remember thinking, I'm in the wrong job. This is ridiculous. Who cares? It's 2 different brown plaids. But what I loved about it was all of the work that went into preparing for it, planning for it, and all of that stuff, which is how I pivoted into kind of doing what I do for a living now. But so it's giving the merchants, people who really are passionate about this stuff, what they need to say, I can see the path forward. This is what we need to do. And when it works, it's great. And people give us compliments, and it's fantastic when we're able to deliver that.
Wow. Where do I start? In folks listening to, they have been beat down by their data. Probably, I think I know I've nailed step one. I can get all sorts of data in, and it's not normalized at all, but it's there, sitting there, not being used. Where's the first step? Like what do I do to approach this in a new way?
So our customers, like our best customers, know what they're trying to figure out. Right. Okay. I know the answer I'm trying to get to. I just don't know how I'm going to get there. And we help them get there. So in your business, like you're in the marketing business, I'm sure it's a tremendously data-driven business because it's all return on investment. So the challenge is, what are your key performance indicators that are going to tell you this is a good investment or a bad investment? And then how are we going to help you get what you need? And we're good at doing what we do because we understand the apparel business. We understand the kinds of decisions people make. So we have a pool of information that's there, right? We're capturing. And then we try to feed it to people in what they need. But the key to it is really understanding, what are you trying to do, right? People don't look at data for intellectual curiosity for the most part. It's, I'm trying to make a decision. So, data obviously is just super in the news now. Everybody's focused on big data and small data and all different data that's driving decision-making. And really it should all be driven by end use. What are the decisions we can make? What data helps us make better decisions, and how do we get there?
Got it. You need to have that question in mind.
I think so.
What are you trying to, right? How many times have we gotten all this data? We have no idea what question we're trying to ask.
Right. And then it's just looking at stuff. So yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah.
cool, right? But it doesn't do anything for you.
So you're saying don't just randomly look at data and wait for it to sort of, or don't fall asleep on it like you fall asleep on the biology book, hoping that you'll by osmosis absorb.
Right.
Don't just blindly stare at a spreadsheet, hoping that the spirit of the numbers will whisper some sweet nothing to
Right.
you.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, no, I mean, it really should be driven by what decisions can you make, and like I said, what information helps you make better decisions along the way there.
Right.
So,
And then knowing what question you want to ask, that's how you and your team are able to say, okay, let's go to the capture. Are we capturing the data that will lead to this answer?
right, exactly.
Is it the
Yep,
time frame that we want to be able to answer it? And then
yep.
I, any guidance on once you have the data, it's normalized, it's in the right format. Are there any traps people fall into? Because I can imagine the data is right in front of you, but then is it a trap? Just, oh, the answer's right there. Is it that straightforward, or is the manipulation really the hard part?
Well, I mean, I think that the trap there's a few. One of them is it's too difficult to capture, so we're just not going to try, or
Yeah.
when we need to, and we don't do it all the time. So therefore, by the time you're getting analysis done, it's not relevant anymore because it takes you too long to put it together. Another trap I think people fall into um, is the accuracy trap, right? So it's if we're capturing data, and this is true for our business, it may not be true for every business, but because we're capturing data that we don't own and our customers don't own, so it's all from the retailers, our customers are all the manufacturers of products. So we have to take what's there. And what we do with it is we are as creative as we can to create the best possible data set that you can make out of this sort of mess that exists, right? What that means is that you're doing a lot of calculations and derivations and things, and you're creating a very directionally accurate data set, but it's not perfectly accurate because perfectly accurate doesn't exist. And I do think that we wind up with people who will spend too much time sort of ticking and tying numbers out and then chasing, a 1% variance versus saying, you know what, this is close enough. Let's not like perfect get in the way of that, and let's make decisions with it. So to me, that's the biggest trap that people would fall into with that.
Yeah, there's something to that. It's either side, right? Going too quickly to a conclusion, but also
Right.
there's the analysis paralysis, like you're saying, and trying to zero it down. But I mean, talk to me about the value of directional answers. I think there's sometimes we're always trying to get that, 1+1 = 2. But if we're like, it's generally 1+1 is generally more than one.
Right.
It's a larger number.
Right. It's not 5. We know that.
Right. It's not. We know
Yeah,
it's
no,
not
I
as
mean,
far as 5. Yeah.
but that's what we do a lot of that. Uh, so our business is very collaborative, right? Like I talked about, we don't own the data. They don't own the data.
Right.
We're grabbing it on their behalf. And what we talk about in that collaborative relationship is that we need them, our customer, to understand that what we're doing for them isn't a perfect science, but that we're putting a lot of science into it. And what I mean by that is auditing, uh, quality assurance checks, all of that stuff. We're doing all the work that needs to be done to say it is directionally accurate information. And directionally accurate information is really valuable, particularly if you can make quick decisions. So if I can know that a product I've just shipped is starting to perform extremely well in certain retailers, and I can get more product into other retailers or more product into better stores or get new product into development, and I can do that quickly, that's super important and really beneficial versus needing everything to be perfect all the time. And obviously you can make mistakes in that. But again, our job is to try and give people a sense of confidence that it is directionally accurate. And I think that's, valuable as long as it's understood and people take the information and use it.
For all the entrepreneurs and CEOs listening, I'm sure that just gave them all permission to go with that gut feel.
Well, I know. Yeah.
It looks like it. It looks
Right.
It's close enough. Let's go. Let's move.
Close enough. Well, I mean, that's what separates, right? Success from
Yeah.
failure sometimes, being first.
Yeah.
So,
Or it's a missed field goal, because it's too
Mhm.
windy.
right.
Could
Right,
be
we know that.
anything.
Yeah.
Could be anything.
Right.
Wait, now are
Absolutely.
you close enough to Boston, or are you too close to New York to?
I'm exactly in the middle of Boston.
Right. So
New York.
which
I
football
grew up in
team?
Maine, so I would root for New England, but
Oh,
then I moved
okay.
to
We
I
can
don't have a
continue.
rooting in.
We can continue.
My son's a big Pats fan, so we go Pats in my house.
Okay, fair enough. The podcast can continue.
Yes, absolutely.
For sure. Well, on that note, one of the questions I want to ask you, it's sort of as a little bit of a tangent, but as an entrepreneur, oftentimes it can be isolating, just like the data can be isolated and without the correct tie-ins. You know, leaders often there's that cliche, it's lonely at the top, but really it's isolating. And so,
Right.
are there any resources or communities you have found to be helpful in terms of connecting with other leaders or other folks in similar arenas to be able to sort of work with each other and work off of each other?
Yeah, I mean, I work with folks in the apparel industry. I have some relationships with people who run different sort of, I wouldn't even say they're competitive, but service oriented businesses in our space. And we do a fair amount of communicating, and that's been helpful. I actually looked into to joining EO Boston at one point, but I'm 2 hours away, and it just didn't really make sense from a
Yeah, we need to add the shuttle, right? We need like a free,
something. Yeah.
air shuttle. We need a helicopter. We'll work
If
on
there
that.
is an EO helicopter, I'll volunteer to be one of the
Okay, so
pilots.
that's what it'll take. If we get you an EO helicopter to bring you to an event, you'll sign up.
Definitely 100%.
Okay. Do we have to bring you to every event on helicopter, or can we get you to one?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Oh, every event. All right.
No,
The costs have gone up now.
right. No, the benefit of talking to people in the role of running a business, it's very different. And anybody who's founded a business knows that those early days are daunting. And I suppose there's always those businesses that get right out of the box and they're just successful right out of the box.
Yeah.
But we certainly weren't there. And so it took us a while to get to get to a point of feeling like we were actually delivering value and the business was successful and that type of thing. And getting there was, especially because it's not like I'm a natural entrepreneur. I never set out to start a business. It was just a product that we needed that didn't exist, and got to a transition point and said, you know what, we got nothing to lose. Let's give it a try. And
Give it a
that was
shot. Yeah.
16 years ago. So,
Jeez.
yeah.
Well, I know we often learn just by doing and seeing what happens.
Okay.
Are there any most popular books or recommended books you tend to tell other people about?
There's a book that I read before I started my business. It was probably right after I graduated college. It's a book called Blue Highways by a guy who was a English professor, his name is William Least Heat Moon. It's an older book. I think it was written in the 80s, but he basically loses his job. He's getting divorced and says, I'm going to go drive, or I'm just going to leave and I'm going to drive around the country. And Blue Highways comes from the old maps where the secondary routes were blue and the highways were red. So I read it, and when I had started my career, I just really did not like my job very much, and I happened to read this book at that time, and I thought, you know what, this would be a really cool thing to do. And so it's not that it's a great book. It was just very transformative for me, because then what happened was, after my wife and I got married, we actually did quit our jobs and we did drive around the country. And then we did an around the world trip. So we spent about a year traveling, and we did that. I did that because I hated what I was doing for a living, and I thought, let's do this, and then I'll reset and do something different. And two things happened. One is, we came back from that trip, and I started back at the company I had left, doing the same job I left within about 2 weeks of coming back. And
Wait, say that again. You
Yeah.
came back from the year-long trip, and then you went back to the same job you
Yeah.
had.
Same job, basically, with different. I was a buyer at Lord & Taylor when I left, and I came back, and I was a buyer at Lord & Taylor when I came back. And the reason why I did that was because part of the value of that trip was realizing that there is no such thing there's no really grass is greener. It's really about living your life. And that even on this, you would think, I've chucked everything, I'm traveling, this is great. And there were times where you're just, it's not easy all the time. And no matter what you're doing, there's difficult things to do. And it's really more about how you react to things and how you deal with them than it is about, there's no perfect thing out there. The phrase I use all the time is, there's no such thing as a one-sided coin. So if you're 51% happy, you're doing pretty good, is the way I look at it. And it was a realization that it isn't so much that I hated my job. I hated certain elements of my job. I wasn't very good at some of them. But part of it was because I also wasn't taking a very, I think, aggressive approach to it or whatever, but I came back and I still do it. So basically I've always been in this business. It's the same. I do basically the same job now that I've always done. And I just feel like that book for me was such an interesting, it's a great book. First of all, it's a really interesting story, but for me, it was very personal and, very transformative. And I think it makes me happy. I think it's one of the things that's really made me a happy person because you don't get focused on what you don't have. You focus on what you do have and what you can do, not what you can't, and all of that stuff.
Yeah. Now, do you think was it the book that was transformative, or was it the trip?
It was
Both.
the book that sort of opened my eyes to the concept that you could do something like this. And
Okay.
then when we did it, it was all the things that happened from there that just were, changed I think the way I look at the world. And I'm not sure I would have done that. Maybe we would have done it anyway, but I know that I started talking to my wife about this idea because I had read that book and it just seemed like such a cool thing to do, a cool way to sort of reset your life. And when in reality, it did reset things, but it didn't reset what I thought it was going to.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because I think a lot of people think that from that, from a vacation or from a break, that you're gonna completely reinvent yourself.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
and maybe you reinvented the way you were thinking about things, but
Right.
that didn't mean you had to be in a different job, industry, role,
Right. Yeah, I thought I'd come
relationship.
back and go to law school or do something else, and it just was, I came back and realized, you know what, I like a lot about what I do. I don't like everything about it, but maybe that's good enough, and it has been, I think.
Do you? And does that then mean that you were already in the ideal job for you, or is this saying that there really is no ideal?
Yeah, I don't think there is an ideal. I think
Okay.
I was in a job that well, one of the things was you need to get a job, right? You gotta pay the bills.
Right.
And so it was something that I knew I could do and that there was definitely big parts of it that I did like, but it wasn't ideal. And so from there, I sort of navigated my way into uh, focusing much more on what I'm interested in, which was what we opened the conversation with, and then started a business basically doing just that. So I kind of whittled down to the only thing about, oh, not the only thing, one of the things I'm most interested about in our industry and what I do for a living.
Yeah. So it's not like you started the company right after coming back from that trip.
No, 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 no. It was that was 10 years later.
Do you think did that book sort of start a slow fuse for you to do that, or was there some
No,
other thing that had you
no, I think
launch
it
out?
was I think the what it that's an interesting question. No, when I came back, I started. So basically, I left it as a buyer. I came back. I was a buyer at a different industry, a different area, and I at that was the time when I started to really, I maybe focused on like, what do I like about what I do and what don't I like about what I do? What am I good at? What am I not? And then I was able to take that information and say, there's other things within my organization that I can do. And I pivoted into more of a planning role and less of a buying role. And part of that is more data management, not data management, but data analysis and how you capture it. And I really then took more of the creative approach at that time, I think. And
Mm.
then I did have the idea that this business could exist, but then it took another 8 years to get to a point where you say, well, I had three kids, I had two kids at the time. Um, my wife wasn't working. So there's some risk, obviously, to starting a business. But it came down to a place where I was going to either have to go get a new job or I could try this. And we figured we'd try it for a year and see what happens. And that was, 16 years ago. So,
Gotcha. I think sometimes when you have a trip like that, you said you didn't just immediately change big things. You had some small steps when you came back.
yeah,
Small steps, but almost incremental. Maybe you would know. Your math definitions would be better than mine, but it feels kind of incremental. Like you came back and you're like, well, it's not business as usual, but I don't need to drastically change anything. Let's shift it a percent or two in the right direction here. Do more of what I enjoy, or do more what I'm passionate about, what I'm good at. And you sort of like refined it over time, but it gave you some sort of impetus to make some changes,
right.
to adapt or optimize. Yeah. Then you optimize that just as much as maybe you would optimize an order or, something else.
Maybe more, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. You were your own
Right.
buy, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
You're
absolutely.
optimizing that. That makes
Yep.
a lot of sense. Where did you go on your trip? And you had a year.
Yeah. So we did, well, there's something else. Yeah. So we left in August and did about 4 months driving around the country. So we did sort of, we looped the country, and we did really follow the sort of blue highway mentality. And we almost never went on any interstate highways at all. So it was all back roads. It's like a back road drive around the country, which was phenomenal. And my wife actually, when she resigned her job, her boss at the time said, if you're going to do this, you really should think bigger and do an around the world trip too. So we wound up buying, at the time you could buy an around the world airline ticket through Delta. It was like $2,500 and you got 30,000 miles and you could basically use them as you went. It was almost like a train ticket. You had to stay in one hemisphere and you had to go through hubs. So you had to, like, it was Delta, Swiss Air, and Singapore Air. So we wound up flying around the world and did that for another 4 months. And in between, I actually got a job as a temp working at Chase Auto Finance as an inbound customer service specialist. And that was very also super helpful because I obviously I'd already had a career. And now I'm doing this thing, making $8 an hour to answer phones if you have a loan question. And it was one of those things of saying, you know what, I actually really I liked what I did for a living because this is terrible.
Okay,
And
so that makes a lot more sense now. Why
yeah,
you would go back to, because you had a chance to do something different. You did have a
right.
chance to sort of test, and you did
I
put the
mean,
toe in the
obviously I wasn't going to do that for a living, but it was a
right.
job that had, I mean, it was not a job that you took home, obviously, and it's not a job that had a huge amount of responsibility. And I think one of the things I didn't like about my job when I left it was I was young. I was only 24 years old, and you get a lot of responsibility very quickly, and you don't have a lot of experience. So it's can be a very overwhelming feeling. And I
Yeah.
realized, you know what, I'd really much rather be overwhelmed than underwhelmed. And I think that was helpful. But anyway, the trip was basically 2 different 4-month trips.
Gosh. Okay. So two questions. Um, Favorite place or places doing that domestic trip, and then
Mhm.
favorite from the international trip.
Yeah, people always ask that. So the favorite's tough because they're all so different.
Right.
So, but we did the whole West Coast from Vancouver down to San Diego. Basically the took the Pacific Coast Highway the whole way and did some camping up in the redwoods, out on the beach and everything, and that was phenomenal. Um,
Don't you find that highway to be like so dangerous? Because I remember driving that and the most beautiful views, but somebody's gotta keep driving.
yeah,
You
well,
know?
that's true. I was always on driving too, so
Right. You're
not
like, oh,
always.
look at, oh, I gotta pay attention here.
But it helps when you have like a month and a half to do it. So
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
trying to get
Yeah.
anywhere too quick. Overseas was great too. Beijing was probably one of our favorite places, only because we had heard so many negative things about it. It's dirty, it's big, whatever. And we got there and it was just one of those, I don't know why, but it was phenomenal. But it was everywhere we went. We went to Russia, we went to Egypt. Egypt was phenomenal. There was just a lot of cool places we went. It was a really neat thing to do. It was helpful in understanding that it's a huge world out there. So we try not to do a lot of going back to places. We still travel a lot. And we've gone back to some of the places we went on that trip. It's nice to go back with a couple of dollars in your pocket too. It makes it very different.
Yeah.
We didn't have 2 nickels to rub together at that time. So,
Oh, so when you did that trip, you it was much more on the cheap. You had the
oh yeah,
Delta ticket, but it was not
right.
like you were, an entrepreneur staying in a nice
No,
hotel.
no.
You hustling? Were you staying in hostels and
We didn't do a lot of hostels. We did a lot of really cheap hotels.
yeah.
We also did this thing called Servos, which was basically host families where you can go and stay with someone.
Mm.
And so you join the organization and there's hosts in each of the different places. And we did that. I guess we did that like 4 or 5 times, which is cool. We stayed in a really neat place in Zurich, outside Zurich, Switzerland, in this 400-year-old farmhouse with this family. It was great. So those things are neat. So we kind of split it up that way. It was cool.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably not even a book would capture. There's just so many different experiences. I mean, you rattled off a few countries that each would have just the most amazing stories.
Yeah, we had some cool, it wasn't all great. That's the whole point. I remember being in Singapore one night. I think we were flying to Beijing and the flight was at like 2 a.m. because I think it's either the same time zone or it's off by an hour. So it was a 2 a.m. flight that was getting in at 8 o'clock in the morning or something. And I just remember, and the Singapore airport, there's a million flights that come in and out of there.
Oh yeah.
And, I don't know, there was a lot of flights, even like our flight wasn't even up yet. And I just remember feeling like, I just want to go home. I'm so tired of doing this at this point. And those are the things you remember and say, you know what, as good as you think you have it, you know, you still got to do laundry. You still got to pay your bills. You got to do all that stuff. So,
Yeah.
don't get worked up over everything that's not perfect, because nothing's ever going to be perfect. So that,
That happened to me one time in Heathrow.
mhm.
Uh, and I had a job early on where it was like 95% travel, which was great when you're younger.
Right.
And you're like, all right, let's do it. But I did get to the point where I remember waking up from a nap in Heathrow Airport, just being like, where am I? What time zone is it?
Right.
And just thinking, maybe I'm getting to the point. And then they wanted to send me to South Korea and coach
Right. Yeah.
24-hour flight.
If you find yourself in a job where they're flying you to Asia coach, it's time to find a new job, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Right.
That's
So I
brutal.
was just like, I can't do it. So I've never actually been to South Korea because I just couldn't do that long flight after
Right.
all that other travel. And normally I could use, points that I had acquired just naturally to upgrade for long trips and that kind of
Right.
thing just on my own. But you can't do that sometimes for some of the Asian countries. You have to pay.
It's right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, South Korea, we went to, so we had the around the world airline ticket, but you had to go through the hubs. So Singapore Air was the hub in,
Okay.
Asia. And so to fly from Beijing to Seoul, um, we would have had to fly through Singapore to get to Seoul, and it's only an hour flight. So we wound up buying a one-way ticket. So we flew Air China from, and actually it's funny, that was a terrible flight. That was, so I wouldn't have wanted to be coach going all, it was just one of those where you feel like you're not going to make it there. We were all over the place. But
Yeah.
anyway,
You're being
Seoul was our
punished.
last stop. So I don't think Seoul I gave it proper chance to, because by the time we got to Seoul, we were ready to go home. So I didn't love
Yeah.
Seoul, but we only were in Seoul. I would like to go back to Korea sometime and travel around a bit.
To your point, it's a big world. And at some
Yeah.
point, you're just looking forward to getting home
Right.
for whatever reason.
Right.
Well, crazy. I'd love to ask just, who are you, Chris? Take me back in time, little Chris days.
Right.
Did you know you were going to be doing what you're doing now, an entrepreneur? Do you have any inkling that you're going to do that?
No, I started, so I grew up in Maine, as I mentioned. I grew up in Scarborough, Maine. And I know that when I was 12 years old, I was going to be the next catcher for the Red Sox without question.
Nice.
I was like the third best catcher in Scarborough Little League. So I probably didn't have a lot of, that much of a chance to actually achieve that goal. So no, I grew up there. All I wanted to do when I graduated high school was get out of Maine. I like it
Goal.
now. I hated it. It was just so, it wasn't, so I went to school in New York. I went to Fordham. And then when I was at Fordham, I had an internship downtown working for a PR company. And I just had this, like, I just loved the city. And all I wanted to do when I graduated was find a job that I could live in the city. So I was a political science major, and they didn't do a lot of recruiting of political science majors for anything. So May Company department stores did recruit at Fordham. So I went through the interviewing program there. It was like a 5 interview process. It was actually really good because you kind of learned about the job. And I was actually became really interested in the training program, which I got into. And so that's how I wound up doing that for a living. But no, I was definitely never going to be in what I do. I mean, I was a terrible math guy. I got a 490 on my math SAT. I mean, I was just I wasn't a great student to begin with, but math was not my thing. But the good news is the math I do is like 7th grade algebra. So I'm pretty good at that. And then I really had no aspirations to be an entrepreneur.
Right.
Because, working for a company, even for the first 7 years of my business, I felt like all I wanted to do was go back and work for a company where I could give them an expense report and I'd get a paycheck and, someone else take care of the healthcare and all of that stuff.
There's a benefit to some of that.
I mean, a lot of it. But now the concept of going back and working for a company would be, I don't think something I would be interested in anymore at all. I mean, what I love about my job, as I mentioned, is the creativity piece, but I also love the idea that if we find an opportunity we want to go after, we can just do it. and we don't have, there's not committee meetings, and we control our own destiny. And I mean, I have a great team that works with us. And I was thinking about the other day, we have people who worked for us for about 12 years. We started hiring people after a few years. It was just a partner and I from the beginning. And all of those people are still with us. We've never had anybody leave who left us. We've had a couple people who came and left because they weren't good fits. Um, but we have a core team of people, even the developers that started that. I mean, so we do data management. So we have a lot of guys who are computer guys. I mean, you do need to have solid scientists that work for you, and those guys are great, and they've been with us since the start. And we have a good group, and that part of it I love. So that is great.
It's funny how
running your own business is not always easy, obviously.
No.
When you manage retail, and then all of a sudden the world goes through a pandemic where all brick and mortar retail shuts down for 3 months. That wasn't the greatest, but we survived it, and here we are. So that's exciting, I think.
That is exciting. Now I have a hypothetical question for you. I may or may not have a time machine up here in New Hampshire. So let's say you come up, we'll get some lobster, get some beer.
Right.
And it's in the backyard under a tarp. We'll go brush it off. You get to use this time machine, and you go back in time and you meet yourself after a couple days after graduating from school. You get to meet that version of you.
Right.
You get to talk to yourself. You won't mess up the quantum theory. Everything will be fine. What kind of advice would you give yourself? What kind of things would you tell yourself, knowing everything you've been through?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I like where I am, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know that I would give myself advice to do something different. I like all the things, like I don't look back and think, oh, if only I had done something different, I could be doing something else. I don't really look at it that way. I think I spend a lot of time, I still do, worrying about things that you kind of, you're up at night worrying about something that a year later, you can't even remember what you were worrying about.
Yeah.
So I guess that would be a part of it. But then the flip side of that is that's part of, I think you got to do that stuff to be successful. You can't just go through life assuming everything's going to be great all the time. But I think if I could give myself any advice, it would be try not to worry about, there's, whether you're going to get the promotion, whether you're going to get the new job, the things, those things come in or don't. Obviously you want to be doing the work properly, because the results you can't control. You can control the effort.
Right.
And maybe give yourself a little bit of advice to give yourself a little bit of a break on that. If you're putting in the effort, you're doing the work, don't worry so much about exactly what's going to happen. Because that $5,000 raise you get when you're 30 years old feels like a fortune. But later in life, it doesn't, just none of it really matters. Right. I mean, I just don't think it matters as you get older. So that it's a tough one. I mean, it's interesting. I don't know. I mean, do you have things that you look at that you would do differently, or what?
Yeah, no, it's really cool because I've asked, close to 300 people this question, and almost no one says, to do something differently.
Right.
The occasional joke about not dating or marrying that ex or whatnot. But for the most part, people have really, and I understand this, you learn so much more when it doesn't work than when it does.
Absolutely.
And so if
failures are really, that is what you remember. And those are the things you try to do better with. Right. I don't know.
Yeah. And so it's almost the more spectacular the failure, maybe up to a point. I don't know. There's probably a curve on that one, but but up to a certain point, those spectacular failures have bigger and bigger lessons. And it'd be interesting to go back and remove those powerful lessons from yourself, and then does that really remove context for you? And do you not really have that wisdom moving forward? I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I wonder about sometimes when people like inherit a business, or, something like they're put in a situation where they haven't sort of grown or earned that wisdom, then it can feel, I don't know, shallow, or it's hard. And if it works well, you might think it's all you, and that's probably the worst thing that could happen is you have this success, no hard work, and just a success. And you're like,
right,
man, I must have got something going on over here. Maybe.
Yeah. And I mean, that's one of the big values is, I always think that's interesting, is to talk to people about how they navigate through the tough times and the lessons you learn then, because like when we started our business, I used to say, I'm going to reach out to all these people so that they can not get back. I mean, that's it, and
Yeah.
initially you take all that really super personally.
Yeah.
But then over time, you realize it's not personal. It's just people have business going on, whatever it is. And the ability to just keep going and just keep chunking through it and doing that stuff. And I wonder if you do inherit a business or you get out and you're just an instant success, nothing lasts forever. So you're going to go through downtimes. You're going to go through difficulties, whatever it would be. And I feel like you got to have those things to be able to navigate to the next good part. Certainly COVID for us was one where if we hadn't had difficulties, we'd be out of business right now because we had to go make really tough decisions really quickly and then know that we're hunkering down and just kind of waiting until things start to open up again. And even now with all the supply chain issues, people are still being very cautious with money. I mean, it's still a difficult time, but we spent all that time, we used all that time to do development for new products and new things that we're rolling out. We're super excited about where 2022 is going to be for us. So it doesn't feel like it was just sitting around waiting. And that I think is because the first 3 years of our business was just doing development, assuming someone will eventually say yes. And, I used to say we're always interviewing for a job no one has a job rec for. And I mean, it takes a while to sort of get through that. And I do think that that's where all the value comes from is the difficulties and the struggles you go through.
Right. So why rob yourself of that? Exactly.
Right. Well,
I
except it
think,
sucks, but
yeah, you're right. No, it does. But I think also when there's that challenge, if it does work, then after
Mhm.
that, it feels way better
Yeah.
than,
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I can't
yeah,
say for sure because I never had an instant success, but I feel like it must. It's gratifying, certainly when you go through it all.
yeah, yeah, 100%. I think one of the things, to your question, I think I would remove, or I would attempt to remove some uh, thought process. You mentioned the worrying about things like that maybe just sap energy for no reason.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
one of the things that came to mind, other than the worrying, was just the idea of, and you mentioned even just not taking it personally,
Right.
you know, um, or taking it personal. So
I'm not sure what the right.
yeah, it's one of those. I get
Right.
corrected about that all the time at home. And I just don't remember in this very moment, but I think it's personal.
Okay.
But just not, bringing that on yourself and wasting energy. Right. If someone doesn't want to sign or someone doesn't want to do this or that, there's 1,000 factors on their end, may have nothing to do with you.
Right.
The
Right.
deal got, and also in the deal, if you sign the deal or you win that, whatever, also trying to take that personally, there's probably a lot of other factors,
Right.
so don't take either of those personal so that you can, navigate that,
Yep. Absolutely.
focus the energy forward instead of sideways, I think.
Right. Right.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, hey man, where could people connect with you if they want to reach out, talk data, just kind of connect or in a similar area?
Yeah. I mean, certainly through our website, which is www.tillermanusa.com. Obviously you can email, phone, whatever. But I mean, our business is we're like a niche business in a niche business. So we're always looking for clients in a very specific sort of zone. So stuff like this.
What's the zone?
The zone is apparel makers who have an interest in understanding what's happening in their business in non-vertical retailers. So if I'm an apparel maker who's doing business with a bunch of different retailers, that's who we want to connect with.
Okay.
Um, it's just not a lot of those folks out there, and
Oh,
there don't
yeah,
need
but
to
you'd
be
be
for us to be
surprised.
successful.
You'd be surprised who listens to this show.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So anyway, no, I mean, we don't, so one of the things we don't do at all, and it's something that for 2022, we're trying to do a better job with is outreach. I don't have a social media presence. We as a company don't have a social media presence. We don't do advertising. We don't do trade shows. We don't do anything.
Right.
We, we get
And it
most
works
of our
apparently.
business. It works well enough. But what it doesn't do, I don't think, is it doesn't give us the ability to start to move in different directions and things like that. Plus, I think what we do, as much as it has application for the apparel business, there's certainly needs in what kind of we do for a living that aren't related to retail and apparel. So it's something that over the next 5 years, hopefully, we start to explore some other opportunities. But for us, it's just we're just, keeping our heads down and focusing on our customers and doing that the best we can with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what you can do for
Right.
sure. Well, man, Chris, this has been fantastic. This has been a trip. I don't know if the time has just warped by.
Yeah. I don't even know how long we've been on the phone, to be honest.
Yeah, it's almost close to an hour at this point.
Wow.
So,
Okay.
crazy, right? It's just crazy how that just sort of maybe we're in a multiverse. We didn't actually talk that long. We just
Right.
got to a different universe. But yeah, thanks again for being on here and sharing that knowledge with us about on the data side, the creative side, and then sharing that blue highways, your own blue highway story.
Right. Absolutely. No, it was fun. I appreciate you having me on. It was great.
Right on. And for those listening, if you learned something, and I freaking know you did, because I've got 2 pages of notes over here, front and back, then share this episode with someone else. That's how you're a thought leader to one person, 8 people, 304, whatever it is, especially on LinkedIn. Just share this knowledge with other people so that they can approach data and analysis in the same way. And yeah, good stuff, man. Chris, thanks again, dude.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, everyone.
All right, cool.
This is it, man. This has been another really cool episode of Leadership in Action. We will see you all next time. Leadership in Action is sponsored by the Boston chapter of the Entrepreneurs Organization. As the world's only peer-to-peer network exclusively for entrepreneurs, EO helps transform the lives of those who transform the world.